So this week in Below the Line I'm asking, what does it take for you to return to Battlefield this year? I often have people saying things like, Luton, how can you still play the game? Or you say you're quitting the game and then you keep playing, and both of these things are true. I've said several times I'm done and enough is enough, and then here I am back again ready for more. It's a strange thing. I've always said this about Battlefield. I've never really been able to place what it is about it, but something just makes me feel good about the physical actions in the game, the movement, the engagement, the feeling of it as an FPS. It's why people who remember me playing out the entire night always just one more round, one more round, one more round, just one more. I can't ever seem to put the damn thing down. And it happens even now to me. I jump in for 1 game, 2 games, it becomes 4, it becomes 10. I can easily play Battlefield for 10 or 12 hours straight with no problem. But what about this year? Well, despite the let's call them troubles since Battlefield 4, I still do have faith that after 2 games that really left a lot to be desired, Hardline, which had a lot of poorly thought out modes, not enough testing done, clearly needed a lot more testing, progression system needed testing, some of the assignments, etc., go on and on. Should have listened to the community. Battlefield 1, with its strange quasi-parallel reality take on World War I, its strange many variants of the same weapon, and if you're in a tank you win the game. I feel like at this point, surely they'll deliver something worthwhile. I myself have come to a point now where I feel like I really don't care in most rounds how my team is doing, so long as I feel like I have done everything that I could do to turn the round in our favour. With that said, I do still always want to encourage people to do team play, and I want to kind of get that going on. So I also plan this year to start getting some of you guys in to play some more rounds. I want to sort of create something around that. I'm going to start that up soon and see if we can't get some regular gameplay going on. For me, more than anything, really what I want is just something that is well balanced, well designed maps. I wish we could do something really drastic like take out those stupid fixed wing aircraft. I'm sorry, but I just truly think they're a waste of time and detract from ground battles. Something with specific guns that has a genuine feeling to their handling. I'd very happily hope we get some emphasis on the overall team win instead of individual glory, and no more stupid weapon unlock assignments. But you know, I'd settle for something that's just solid netcode, well thought out maps, balanced well, substance over style. DICE have had a habit of getting so into their graphics lately that I really think they'd actually be better off making just a single player game if that's where they're at. So for sure, nice graphics, but make sure that it balances in line with the actual playability of the game. My last 2 points are simple and easy. No gimmicks, more destruction. I don't want Levolution or Behemoths, I want a solid Battlefield game where you can shoot at a wall made of plaster and bullets penetrate and you can smash through. A brick wall can be taken down with a grenade launcher and RPG. Buildings can be brought down to the ground. Destruction is a core principle of Battlefield, and I swear since Hardline, it's been lost. There are very few opportunities in Battlefield 1 outside of the pre-made houses to really use it to its full potential. Now that I think about it, it's actually completely minimal. And I remember around the launch and the beta, I remember other YouTubers actually kind of like going against what I had actually seen and tested myself. There were producers who, because DICE and EA had told them like, yeah, there's full destruction, they were going around stating that as a fact when I had literally proved that that was not the case. So, you know, I really want to see that properly come back. So really those are my desires in brief for the next game to bring me back in. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Deliver a clear game with a strong focus on netcode, weapon balance, map design, no bullshit, and great destruction. Now, even if you feel like you don't want to get back on board, what would it take to convince you otherwise? So that's what we're talking about. Tell me down in the comments below. Okay, now we come to part 2 of Below the Line, and last week we were discussing around should fixed-wing aircraft be a staple for modern FPS multiplayers, stuff like Battlefield, COD, but anything else in the kind of arcade sphere. We were talking about the implications it has in terms of taking players off of the ground, and how it can be basically an incredibly powerful tool, and it just ends up becoming basically a very large divide between those players who are really in those top percentile and your average normal player. Carcinogenic says, honestly, I think Battlefield is a bit of a lost cause for any kind of tactical gameplay. As you've said, the types of players that play Battlefield aren't particularly interested in any sort of plan, and having strictly AI aircraft would go against what the majority of the player base wants. For more tactical games like Sandstorm, it makes more sense, but air warfare has always been a part of the modern Battlefield franchise, so stripping that feature would be seen as a downgrade by many. That's a good point. He says, honestly, pilots aren't invincible up in the air, especially when you had stingers and the like back in Battlefield 3 and 4, and at the very least, I guess they were kind of an annoyance, made them move away a bit. So this idea of replenishing ammo may not be necessary. I don't agree about that. He says, I'm not pretending to know what's best for the FPS genre, but for what it's worth, I'd say let people who enjoy playing Battlefield in a more Call of Duty style of way play it, and let people like us who seek a more tactical strategic game fall into the indie titles like Sandstorm, which might not have the prettiest graphics or brand recognition, but likely have better developers who are much more involved in the community. And I hear what you're saying, and I don't totally disagree, and it's actually why I like the games like Insurgency and Squad and stuff like this, because, yeah, I do feel, and Postscriptum, and it's because, yeah, it's exactly for that reason. You do have that kind of more player base who are all on the same page to a point, as opposed to Battlefield, which does have just this larger player base, and therefore it's such a mixed bag, and the only thing that's consistent is the chaos. So I don't know, but I do feel that sometimes if they would take some stronger stances on certain elements of Battlefield, it would improve things overall. And sometimes I think, some players, and I don't want to sound too kind of arrogant here, but it's like I think sometimes some players maybe don't see what would be best for everybody, and that these kind of changes could represent just a change in the dynamic of the gameplay that would be beneficial for the whole. Now, talking about rearming here, and Phantom Chaos says, I agree with ammo limitations are the way to go. It'll keep players from staying in the air forever. Another thing that could be added is fuel, so even if the player has weapons left, he needs to worry about his fuel. I thought I'd keep in all the comments here because, well, not all, there's a few more below, but the relevant comments, because Reaper says, Phantom Chaos, what about air refueling and airfields? I like this idea, but only for longer matches. It wouldn't work in a 10-minute game. I keep this in because this is the way these kind of conversations go, and this is what I want to show, is that, it's the kind of disparity between the people who are actually doing on the ground and the guys in the air who are just thinking about all this other stuff, and it's like, dude, it's not relevant. It's not relevant to Battlefield. Capta says, as much as I like the concept, there's serious problems with this idea. Your team will give zero fucks about enemy camping the airfield. They're going to complain about why you're not dropping bombs for them. You can see this by flying in BF1 and observing nobody shooting the AA that's shooting at you, and then they call for friendly AA in the chat. On top of this, making the planes impotent for a time while they rearm and refuel means they have to be extremely potent when they're active. The results are in them being very strong, which could suck for infantry. Present solution of timed automatic rearming seems to work quite well, much easier to adjust for balance. And this is the thing for me, I really feel like often the air combat guys, not helicopter but fixed wing, the fixed wing pilots in Battlefield always, there seems to be this huge disparity but just kind of what they're doing and what they want maybe compared to everybody else, and I kind of feel like sometimes would they just be happy in something like DCS or armor? So going on from that, you have Capdu says, this is a subject near to my heart as an in-real-life pilot who started playing Battlefield because it had jets. Now, I'm a sweaty, try-hard pilot, the kind of guy with a post-it note with the passwords for the private dogfighting servers, a friend who is dedicated gunner, and another who is my heli pilot. That being said, I actually really enjoy infantry combat, and that's where I spent most of my time. This is actually a whole bunch of issues, which aren't necessarily related or aircraft specific. Bear with me while I break it down. I know this response will be too long for the next episode, and that's where you're wrong, my friend, but I think you all take something from it. He says, Battlefield 3, the jets were incredibly powerful, too much so. A decent pilot on the team with no decent pilot to counter them meant for sure base rate. This made sense when teams were balanced, such as in a competitive setting, because the planes would battle it out for air superiority, and by winning the dogfight earn strong support for the team. In public matches, it was seen as the planes circling around and around forever, or it was an OP nightmare, absolutely. A from the ground was weak and really the Tunguska, and served mostly only to annoy the heck out of pilots with its incessant beeping. AA missiles could be dodged by means of skill, and that was good, but it left infantry with few options to counter a strong pilot. Battlefield 4 approached this problem by making stealth jets stronger in the air, but very weak against ground targets, and attack planes vice versa. However, again, the whole concept fell to pieces with poor team balance. What a shocker that is. Essentially, any decent pilot would take the attack plane and farm ground targets, indeed, only using the stealth jet if a decent pilot took the stealth jet against them. At this point, they'd clear the air and commence boredom, since the aircraft was then incapable of effective ground support. AA was mostly weak, again an annoying beeping sound with skillless options like active radar missiles, weak attempt to provide ground troops with some method to counter the air, it didn't work, it served only to annoy pilots at the low skill counters for their high skill flying. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. He says BF1 actually got it right, which was facilitated by allowing small arms to damage aircraft and ditching health regeneration to shorten dogfights. However, the general low skill of BF1 players reared its head, yes, and those bad players failed to engage the planes and got farmed. The planes have been nerfed heavily, AA buffed heavily, and accordingly only sweaty pilots can now really do any good, and even the planes are now so underpowered that they can't really affect the outcome of the match like Air Sport could. I don't know, you should watch some of Jack's bombing runs that he's been posting up. There are several variants of each aircraft and only a few are actually viable, as the AA is so strong that you really need to have an instant repair perk in your plane. We now have the opposite problem to BF3. The planes are weak, the AA is too strong, but again, poor team balance often rears its head, and a decent pilot often goes uncountered, and the bad infantry didn't engage them and complain that planes were OP. So there's a general problem, not only with balance between ground and air, but in the balance of player skill between teams. On top of this, there is another issue, that of the scrub. There are pilots out there who are good and could help their team immensely, but don't. In theory, they'll PTFO and help the team by spotting for the infantry on the ground and by killing spotted targets at the most important objectives, as in air support. In practice, many good pilots measure their success not by how well they supported the ground troops, but by their KD ratio at the end of the game. What an amazing shock that is to me. This doesn't always serve to help the team. This is a surprise. They'll take the easy quad kill over there rather than helping you kill that one sniper that has your whole squad pinned down on the way to the flag. It's entirely common to see your plane and the enemy plane in a kind of unspoken truce, farming ground targets and never engaging each other. Why the fuck don't they take this shit out of the game? This kind of selfish gameplay is certainly not limited to aircraft, but it's very apparent there if you're the guy on the ground asking, why the fuck is our plane not shooting that guy? That's me most of the time. AI-controlled air support isn't really air support, it's just a kill everything over there button. No, not necessarily. It depends on how specific it is and how much damage it does. It's not a solution to the issues of team balance, air-ground balance, or poor attitude of players, that's true. Battlefield has long ignored these issues, as serious pilots are a vast minority, and they just don't sell enough copies to make it worthwhile. The devs are very clever, and they can fix it if they want to, and are allowed to, and start listening to good players and not typical Reddit crybabies. I don't have much to say here other than Captor is right. He makes a load of very, very strong points, and I would encourage you guys to answer in the chat about it. Mr. Flibble says, with a number of the games mentioned, a 50-50 dynamic is going to remove players from ground combat roles and what are typically large map sizes. Removing the player base from that is generally not a good idea, so even in Postscriptum's 8x8 kilometer maps, it could probably be physically possible, it wouldn't be wise. They do generally, as you touched on, keep doing their own thing as well, that's the pilots, and not have much real effect on the ground. That does depend, but yeah, it's true. Call-in AI airstrikes will enable the games to keep all players fighting on the ground and still remain a very immersive element to the gameplay. The only exception, I think, in Armour, where you have multiplayer experiences against AI, map sizes suit that use of air power more. There might be an argument to suggest that squads should have helicopters for transport, but most of their maps aren't big enough to warrant it. I don't know, I don't agree about that. I think a squad can easily handle some transport helis, and I think it would look good, and I think it's needed. He says those that are, it'd probably be wise to just have it versus US v Russia or major power versus major power as UK forces are coming. Otherwise, there's going to be a serious imbalance in the gameplay if US has them and insurgents don't. I mean, again, you could always have some kind of reclaimed old Russian ones or something, I don't know. Still inclined to believe they'll spend more time concentrating on each other, though, rather than the big picture. If they do go with that, I always like to see more troops dropped by helicopter, not have the option to drop a rally point, so that will limit any map exploits and mean that helo drops are more risky and a realistic move. I think helicopters in general are a better way to go because they have more vulnerabilities. They have to be lower, they have to, they can take more ground fire, pilots can get shot out, players jumping out of them can get killed, RPGs into them, all these kind of things. So it does make a big difference. I think Battlefield actually needed to, that's another video, but I think Battlefield needed to make some balances in terms of like if they're going to have helicopters, BF4 with the guys endlessly repping, and I used to love that as well. I used to be, helicopter pilot and have the guys on repping me whilst I'm running around, like ruining everything. And it's all very well and good, but it is a little little bit bonkers, it is definitely a little bit OP. And that's why I should never go for those stupid defibs, because I never do it. John Fargan says, really interesting series, looking forward to more of these videos. I was also thinking about ammunition limited solutions as well. COD allows for the player to use air support as a score reward, but I always thought that could be altered to promote more tactical gameplay by simply limiting the ammunition available to the air unit. For instance, a drone might carry 2 Hellfire missiles, or a helicopter only 12 or so rockets. If it was ammunition limited calling ability, you'd have more intermittent air power, rather than players just wheeling in the sky. Players would pilot only for a minute or so while they use up their ammo and then return to the battlefield. It would make it more of an event as well when air support was called in and was more terrifying and significant, etc. While in COD, air support is simply a way of a top player racking up more kills. If this concept was applied to a large game like Battlefield or Squad, its use would be more tactical. An example, 2 tanks have been holding up a valley and wrecking friendly armor. Squad leader calls in an airstrike and takes control of an attack helicopter flying in. This helicopter has to reach the map, then can fire its laser guided Hellfire missiles at the tanks, potentially disabling or destroying them. Then it has to try and escape enemy air defenses. If it's shot down, then that's points to the enemy and potentially a crash site for the ground troops to fight over. It also could delay future air support. The benefit is that the player is only out of the action for 1 minute or 2 tops, but it has a meaningful impact on the battlefield, changing the dynamic of the match without overstaying their welcome or utterly devastating the whole team. It would also make people look up when they hear the sound of a helicopter rather than just ignoring it as if it was an annoying insect. Yeah, I mean, I actually prefer more kind of these kind of scripted, sort of even on-rails scenarios for air combat coming in. And I know it's going to be a funny thing to say, and I'm sure that some people will not be too happy about it. But actually, I think it works better because very often, like you say, you kind of come in for a limited period of time. It doesn't have too much disruption to the rest of the battlefield. It doesn't have too much disruption to your players. And it's still an event. It's still something special which happens. It's not just there and ongoing all the time and disconnected. It's something which comes in, has a meaningful impact, and then you just get back on with what you're doing on the ground. So I think personally, yeah, that's a better direction to go, myself personally. Okay, next up, Cap'n says, I honestly think that relying on AI air-controlled support is really an underrated feature. Planes in combined arms video games are always very difficult to balance because just by their nature, they are on top of the food chain. Exactly, that's it. In real life, these kind of units are force multipliers, and so adding it into a game, it kind of is the same. If you took a look at modern real-life wars, you'll soon notice that air superiority is everything because aircraft are simply that powerful. Just look at the Gulf War or the NATO intervention in Yugoslavia. This power also translates into video games. Because of the fast nature of planes, a slow plane would make little sense. A talented pilot would be unable to run away from every ground threat. The only real danger for a skilled pilot is an equally skilled pilot in the other team. But if the other pilot is not on par, there's very little the other team is going to be able to do against air attacks. This happened to me more than enough in Battlefield, but also in PlanetSide 2. A good enemy pilot would just decimate every armor, helicopter and infantry and make it impossible for us to win. I don't think that one player, regardless of how good he is, should get so much power that he's basically able to solely determine the outcome of a match of 64 players, but by the very nature of how aircraft work, this is always going to be a problem. By reducing air support to AI-controlled aircraft, you can avoid this balance problem. Whilst this would suck for the very few talented pilots, the majority of the player base, which are mostly playing infantry, would, in my opinion, actually profit from such a change, since it would lead to a lot less frustration in matches. However, it is unlikely that this is going to happen in BF or PS2. It's just too big of a marketing tool, and the backlash in the community, of course, would be huge. And yeah, look, that is the thing, but at the same time, I don't think it's that often where you get those really devastating pilots which, solo can own a team. I don't think that's really the case. You can definitely get them where they can control air superiority and they can be a pain in the ass, but, in my opinion, there should always be like a strong counter to everything. It shouldn't be that pilots can just sit there and then they can just fly away and come back and fly away and come back and fly away and come back. And I remember it on so many occasions in Battlefield, that was the case. And literally, like I've said in the other video, unless you have a pilot of equal skill level, which wouldn't be me, it's like, like I think some guy was calling me out in this last video, and I say calling me out because I could just put our hands up straight away and be like, I'm not a good pilot. I never really spent a lot of time even practicing in doing piloting stuff really at all because I don't enjoy it. It's not really, funnily enough, it's not why I play an FPS Battlefield game. It's for the Battlefield infantry gameplay. What a shock. But if I did spend a lot of time investing in piloting and so on, I'd probably end up becoming like a kind of middle of the road average pilot. I don't think I'd be a particularly good pilot. It's just not really me. It's not really kind of why I play these games. But at the same time, I think that's really truly the case for a lot of people, because those kind of pilots that are those top end percentages, it's a low amount of people. It's a lot. I could tell you on one hand the amount of players that I know who really focus on that kind of air gameplay. It's a really minimal amount of people who really get into that kind of stuff in these kind of arcade stuff anyway. If it's something more like a bit of a simulation, then bloody everybody wants to do it, because, you know, it's a totally different ball game. But in this, it's such a specific skill set. And like I say, you know, and then the pilots rage if someone on the ground can easily take them down, and that just kind of, it just helps, doesn't it just highlight more the disparity? You know, it's like you have to do it on our terms. You know, it's like either you have to get up into our ballpark and deal with that. And don't you see how that is the disparity? You know, it's like, yeah, you've got to come in, you've got to practice, train, do all this BS, and it's just like, dude, fucking hell, like, can't we just play on the ground? Honestly. So I'm not a big fan of it, and like I say, I'm not the only one. There's many, you know, there's other producers I know who have spoken to who are also not a fan of it. And, you know, are they going to take this out of Battlefield? Are they going to take it out of other things? I quite honestly feel like it would be a very strong experiment to try. I do think it would be a positive thing overall, even if a certain amount of people did get pissed off about it, and we just had to say, bad luck, mate. Tell me what you think about this, guys. Tell me what you think about our topic for this week, which is what's it going to take for you to get back into the game. I'll see you next time for some more Below the Line.